Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 28th episode of the Backyard Banter Podcast. My name is Matt Harmon. I am coming from you from this great state of Louisiana. I'm podcasting on the road right now, which is very exciting. And but even more exciting, I'm joined by a friend, a colleague, a titan of the TV industry, TV's Marcas Grant. Marcus, how the hell are you doing, man?
I'm honored to be here after that introduction. I don't know if I can live up to that, but I'm happy to be here. It's nice that you finally called me to get me on your podcast. I'm excited.
Well, listen, you are completing the Stronghold circle here. Unfortunately, I've been on every episode. That's the downside of this podcast. But yeah, you are completing the circle here of the four of us in the Fantasy Stronghold. And I couldn't have you guys like episode 1, 2, 3. Well, let me just get all my pals on here. I couldn't have it go down that way. But no, of course, thank you so much for joining me. And I was definitely, you were always in the plans, man. You were always in the plans.
I know. But it's fun to give you a hard time about it.
People do seem to like doing that. But anyways, Marcus, before we get to you, I do want to just throw out a little business note here about the podcast to the listeners. I will not be doing any shows next week because I am traveling. I'm going to go pretty much completely off the grid next week. I will be back in LA later in the week, but we're not going to do any shows next week. So we'll have episode 28, and then we'll take a week off, and then we'll come back next week. I hope you all aren't too disappointed in that. I know that you'll probably live without this show, but I figured I'd let you know anyways. But Marcus, we'll start with you now. Of course, I always start the podcast asking every guest, how did you come to kind of fall in love with football? Or unlike me, I know you're a man of multiple sports. So what's your sports background, my friend?
I've been watching sports as long as I can remember. I think some of my earliest memories as a kid, I remember watching the Dodgers right about the time Fernando Mania was big in the early 80s. I remember that. I remember watching Marcus Allen as a kid. I remember watching him in his USC days because I thought at the time, even as a kid, as 4 years old, thinking how cool USC's fight song was and how other traditions were awesome. But I remember watching Marcus Allen there. I remember loving him with the Raiders, during his pro career. Yeah, and even I go back with the Warriors. I'm all excited. Game 1 of the finals is Thursday night, so I'm fired up about that. But I remember I go back with the Warriors to the days of Sleepy Floyd and Larry Smith, when the most we could hope for was just to make the playoffs. I have been, thanks to my dad, around sports in some form or fashion pretty much my entire life.
Yeah, if you're watching if you're one of the 5 people that watch the YouTube broadcasts of this show, you'll see that Marcus is sporting his Golden State Warriors shirt. Also, unfortunately, you'll notice that I am in full on wilderness mode. Yeah, it's been my cross country trip is coming to a close here, but the effects have definitely worn on me. That's for sure. But no, yeah, Marcus, and I know that you, like you said, you've been following the sports for your entire life, but your football team is the 49ers, and I know this because you hate Torrey Smith, and it's it's something that we're clearly on two polar opposite sides of the spectrum this year. But so when did you kind of become a 49ers fan and hate Torrey Smith?
I vaguely remember the first Super Bowl championship when they beat the Bengals. I have a vague memory of that. But it was definitely my whole life. The Raiders left Oakland. I was an infant. I might have been 3 years old when the Raiders left Oakland the first time around. So the Niners were really the only thing that was there football-wise, and it certainly helped that as I was growing up, the Niners were really good. I grew up with Joe Montana and went over to Steve Young. And so, success with the 49ers was kind of all I knew. And so, pretty much from an early age, my friends and I would be in the street playing football, and we'd argue over who got to be Jerry Rice or whatever on a particular day. That's just it's always been that way because I was fortunate to grow up in a period where the Niners were really, really successful.
Well, that is nice. A little bit different nowadays, of course, but
yeah.
So here's of course the next kind of part of the story is what made you get the itch to want to cover the sport, or when did you decide, or did you even decide that this was going to be your life, that this was going to be your career?
I think I decided that in college. I knew I always wanted to pursue something in a writing capacity. I thought I wanted to be a writer. And then I always joke that I heard that writers died painless and insane, so I figured I'd become a journalist because at least they had their sanity. But I thought when I was in high school, I really thought I was going to angle toward like network, like serious news. I mean, I thought in high school maybe I would take over, for Tom Brokaw or something like that and be a national news anchor. It was when I got to USC, I got to college, and I remember that first weekend on campus, finding out there was a student radio station meeting with the sports director, who told us, yeah, come on over, we'll put you on air, we'll get you a beat. And then I realized that, wait a minute, I sit around, I talk about sports with my friends and my family all day anyway. Like, I never really thought, I finally put two and two together that I could make a career out of it. So, I mean, I think from my freshman year of college on, I think I decided, well, sports is more of my passion, is more of what I'd like to do. And I decided I'd figure out some way to earn a paycheck out of it.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I think I can remember a few months back, like you telling me at one of our team building happy hours, that you were like, yeah, I originally wanted to go into like serious news or something. And I was like, and don't take this, I know you're not going to take this the wrong way, but like, I can't imagine you doing serious news because you're a very like fun guy. You're I would say of the four of us, your biggest strength is you're like actually a humorous writer, whereas I don't find any ability to be able to communicate humor in writing. So it is kind of funny that originally that's what you thought was going to be your path.
Yeah, I feel like what I do now has allowed me to kind of incorporate all the things I wanted to do. Like, as a kid, I never wanted to do the whole, policeman, fireman, doctor, lawyer thing. Like, I think my career choices as a kid ranged from I wanted to be a magician. I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. I thought I was going to be maybe the first black president, but somebody beat me to that one.
Jerk.
I know, right? I mean, those were kind of what I wanted to do. So now I feel like I get the chance to kind of, incorporate all that. I get to be humorous, which I'm thankful for in my job. I have to try to predict the future, which is sort of like magic. And kind of like the president, I get to wear nice suits on television every so often.
Yeah, but not with ties.
No, not with ties. No. Untrustworthy, those tie wearing guys.
No, that's a little office inside joke that the audience definitely won't get, which is always good. If you have a chance on podcasts, definitely make sure to drop.
Always do that.
Definitely make it. Yeah, make inside jokes that your audience can't relate to. That's perfect. That's good podcasting. Check one. No, but you're right. You do get to. That is a very astute observation. You do get to kind of especially do all that stuff and the telling the future thing. Yeah, that's a little bit of that's kind of the more complicated part of our job. So did you actually go to school then for broadcast media or anything like that?
Yeah, I was a broadcast journalism major. And it's weird. Like I said, I went from wanting to do hard news to doing sports. At the same time, I think in college, I decided that, I liked radio more than television. I mean, we had TV and we had TV, based classes or whatever. But I liked doing radio. It was a lot more free form. I thought it was a lot more open. And so I think, somewhere midway through my college career, I think I just shifted my focus to, hey, maybe I'll try a career in radio. And that's kind of where it led me for a while.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So we've asked a few people on the show that have done kind of the journalism, broadcast media schooling background, like Patrick Claybon, who, obviously we both know, talked about this on his episode. Rotopat talked about it on his. And so I kind of asked both of them, do you find that was like worth it? That's always the big question. Like people say, oh, you don't need to go to journalism school or you do need to go to journalism school. Where do you stand on that issue?
I do think there's a place for it. I think there's still something to learning how to communicate. And I think, I think especially now, because there are so many more avenues for, so many different platforms, whether it's, blogging or podcasting or doing web shows or anything like that. I think there's something to be said for just going out and doing it. And I think the internet has made it a lot more democratic in that respect. But I do think there's something to learning kind of the structure of it and the structure of how to tell a story. I think more, you can learn grammar, you can learn punctuation, all that kind of stuff. But I think, whether it's whether it's just a movie or it's a TV show or anything you're doing, or a news story. I think the ability to structure a story and tell it properly is essential to what we consider to be good journalism or good content. And I think that is where journalism schools still have their place.
Yeah, I mean, I did not go to journalism school, but I can definitely relate to your perspective there, or at least I would say that I agree with it in a lot of ways. Like I can remember, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you, but I can remember I've said this to Alex though. I can remember listening to the Fantasy Live podcast after I got hired with NFL, like before I moved out there. And I could remember hearing you specifically, like the way you just would be able to communicate ideas. I'd be like, oh my God, I can't talk like that. I don't know how to present a story that way, or even just in a humorous way with the same like inflection. Cause there's just a way to talking about it that I still don't feel like I have a great grasp on or anything, but it definitely comes from having that probably in your background. Cause you can be as smart as you want about football or fantasy football and be like the smartest guy in the room. But if you don't know how to communicate, you're up shit creek without a paddle.
Yeah, basically, and I think you started to see it, especially with a lot of the former athletes who are now going into broadcasting. I mean, that they have that broadcast boot camp for guys playing in the NFL who decide that that's what they want to do after their career. And I think we've seen it. We've seen plenty of guys who were great on the field, who obviously know the game of football, but because they weren't able to get their thoughts out in a coherent manner, they didn't necessarily last long on television.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that they have we have a coach go around in the office like sometimes and he'll like tell people how to talk. And which seems so funny, or to say it like that. Oh, well, you got to learn how to talk or anything. But there's definitely a way to do that. Like I can remember the first time doing podcasts, I might still be bad at it, but I certainly was worse when I started. Just there's a way to communicate things. It's different from talking with your friends in real life, I would say. But Marcus, kind of getting back to you a little bit here. So you graduated from USC, broadcast journalism, yada, yada, yada. So what's your first, and I know you said that you kind of found your lane in radio. What was your first gig out of school?
My first gig out of school actually was not a radio gig at all. I was working for a website called Digital City. They were like the subsidiary of AOL, right about the middle of the tech boom in the late 90s. And my job was just to kind of sit and kind of be a kind of a sports writer, so to speak. I mean, we covered local news and entertainment and that sort of thing. And so I would just kind of sit and write LA-based sports columns for a while. Eventually, that turned into a bigger gig where we started covering more cities, and we just basically were doing club reviews, which sort of got boring to me. That's not that had not been what I signed up for. So at that point, I said, well, let me go and actually try radio, and just actually had a contact from college, somebody who had been staff. She had taken a job at the local or at the public radio station, KCRW in Santa Monica. I reached out to her, just telling her, hey, I'm just a year out of school, want to do radio. Is there anybody I can talk to? And they got me in there as like a late night, midday board op, making a handful of dollars an hour. And it was my first ever paid gig in radio. I think I got to read announcements. I would read the legal ID at the top of the hour, and I would tell you, National Public Radio is brought to you by blah, blah, blah. That was it.
Oh man, so you worked for an NPR, like the actual entity?
It wasn't the national one; it was a local affiliate. But KCRW has, what I learned while I was there, certainly has a lot of clout when it comes to NPR stations across the country. So it was an interesting place to kind of get my first radio experience.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I've obviously listened to like 3,000 NPR podcasts on my cross country trip. I love that. That's real cool. So how did you eventually climb the ladder into more than just reading the announcements?
You know what? I never did, because while I was working there, what I really wanted to do right out of school was get a radio play-by-play job, like preferably doing minor league baseball. So while I was working at KCRW, I was still kind of applying to baseball teams across the country. I went to a big job fair in Dallas and got hired to be the voice of a minor league team in the middle of California. And so I was only at KCRW for maybe 9 months or so. I was working 2 jobs and trying to get a baseball gig. I never really advanced beyond reading announcements, but it's still one of the jobs I think I cherish the most. It was just such a great experience.
So you were actually like a play-by-play, whatever the hell the baseball equivalent is for a minor league baseball team?
Yeah, I did. I was a play-by-play announcer for 2 seasons. One in the great city of Visalia, which is just about 45 minutes south of Fresno, and 1 year in Stockton. That was 2 years. 2 years in the California League. It was pretty amazing.
What is that like? What kind of skill? What kind of I don't want to say like what kind of skills go into that, but just describe that job experience, because that's something I don't think that we've had anybody on the show that's done something like that.
It's a lot of fun, and I love baseball. And it was interesting. It's an amazing. I'm gonna get you on board. We're gonna teach you who Mike Trout is. You're gonna love it. But I remember. It's just an interesting experience. I mean, you travel on buses up and down the state of California. You spend a lot of time kind of by yourself, especially because I did broadcasts alone. So it's a lot of preparation. It's a lot of talking, because you're trying to fill basically 3 hours of airtime, especially when you're on your own. So it taught me a lot about pacing, a lot about how to speak. It taught me a lot about research, because you had to have stories just in case the game was a blowout or if it was just slow or what have you. So it really, I think, prepared me for what the future. And it was, it's another thing that I'll never forget, because it's just 2 years with, traveling the byways of minor league baseball. It sounds kind of romantic, and at times it is, but it was definitely a memorable experience.
It sounds that way for sure. So I'm going to kind of just skip ahead a little bit, or I don't even really know, because this is all I'm learning so much about you right now, Marcus. So how the hell does all of this end up getting you to NFL.com?
Well,
and feel free to fill any blanks in there that I'm clearly leaving out.
No, that's fine. Like, I kind of ended up at the NFL by accident. I mean, after minor league ball, I landed in Fresno and did radio there for 5 years. From there, I moved back to Los Angeles. I was with Sporting News Radio's national network, kind of as an update guy and, fill in late night host if necessary. But when the Sporting News Radio was sold to a guy in Houston, and they pretty much took our jobs away. They offered me a spot in Houston. I decided that I would rather stay and live in Los Angeles than move to Houston. And so, looking for a job, I was doing freelance writing, whatever I could find. Got word to apply for jobs at the NFL. And I had no idea what I wanted to do with the National Football League. I just knew I kind of needed a job. The NFL seemed fun. It was a short walk from my apartment. So I think I applied for 4 or 5 jobs with the NFL. Completely had forgotten about it. I mean, like, I think 4 or 5 months went by. Keep in mind, this was also during the NFL lockout. So I forgot about it. And then one day after a few months, Michael Fabiano calls me, asks if I wanted to interview to be a fantasy football writer. And I said, does it pay? I said, sure, I'll show up there. And, the rest is kind of history.
That's interesting. I feel like we all have the same franchise kind of said the same thing too. And I think it was my experience, you like get the call and then, or you before you get the call, you apply, and then like months or like a long time goes by before you actually know whether you're going to actually interview for the job or not. That seems kind of indicative of the way things go sometimes at NFL.
All right, well, I guess I feel better that it wasn't just my experience alone then.
No, yeah, I think I feel like that was the way it was for all of us. I mean, I remember applying during the draft, and I interviewed with you and Alex, and then you guys were like, "All right, well, the draft is coming up, so we'll probably talk to you in like a month." And I was like, "Oh my god, I gotta sit around and like wring my hands about this for a month." But I'm sure nobody at home is feeling sorry for either of us about that. But
probably not.
Yeah, for sure. Like back in 2011, certainly the NFL fantasy team is not as big as it is now.
No, it was Michael Fabiano. It was me. Adam Rank, would jump in every now and then and write stuff, but that was it. I mean, the Fantasy Live show I think it had been on the air maybe 2 years at that point when I started. Certainly not long, so they were still kind of shuffling through what they wanted their lineup to be. But no, the fantasy department was, and because we had such limited manpower at the time, I was just a 7-month employee. Fantasy was really big for us from August through basically January, and then from January till about June or July, we went dark. So it's a far cry from now, where we really helped create this. I mean, and a lot of it goes to Alex Gelhar, him just being really persistent about it. But we've kind of made it now that NFL fantasy is a year-round entity, that we still have content in February and March and April. That I think speaks a lot to how much it's grown in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, even just being a fan of that, like that was back, I guess, 2011, 2012 was like my junior year in college. And like, it's definitely just, well, of course, now knowing it from the inside out, it's definitely changed a lot. That's for sure. And so speaking to kind of your personal change of that, I think the question on everybody's mind, mostly me, but everybody probably, how do you get from being, just a writer to then like getting your spot on TV? Cause you're like on NFL Fantasy Live now. You're, like I said, you're a celebrity. Basically, we were walking down this is a true story. We were walking down the street in the Valley, and somebody was me, you, and Alex, and somebody recognized you. Somebody's like, "Hey, there's that Fantasy Live guy." So how do you, you're literally a celebrity. So how do you go from that transition from a writer to like a TV personality?
I kind of got lucky there. I mean, I think I had mentioned offhandedly to a couple of the producers, whether it was Hytham Kalani or Alex Wood. I think actually at the time it might have been like a Dylan Milner, who I think was still one of the regular producers. I offhandedly mentioned once or twice, like, hey, if you ever need somebody to fill in on the show, I'd totally do it. And I mean, God bless Dylan, and I know Matt Lathrop, I think, was involved, maybe Jeff Talley. At one point late in the year season, they asked me, they're like, hey, would you like to be on? Just come do a cameo for such and such segment. And I know they had the battle, so I'm grateful to those guys. I think they really had to fight to get me on there. So, it was just one of those things where you realize you have a shot now, and you don't know if it's going to come this way again. So you do what you can just to be prepared for it. And I'm fortunate that they like me, that they still think I'm worthy of putting on television a few days a week. So it's been a fun ride, but just kind of me jokingly bugging the producers if they'd let me somehow be on the show.
Yeah, there does seem to just be kind of like I'm here, I'm ready, but you mentioned like always being prepared, because you never know when that opportunity goes around or is going to come back around again. What do you think goes into that, like into being prepared to be kind of called up to the next level in that sense? What is it that you have to kind of mentally be churning around, or is it anything at all and it's just kind of something that comes natural to you?
Well, I won't say it comes natural, but I do think for me it helped. I think it goes back to doing the play-by-play and to being on radio. It's just being in a situation where you can think off script and you can speak off script, but as long as you know your facts, I mean, and I think that's the one thing that, when we get the Stronghold together, we do a podcast. I think what's fun is that we all know what we're talking about. Like, we all have, maybe we're on a laptop and we're looking up numbers, but the fact is you understand the subject matter. That is a big part of it. I mean, once you know the subject matter, that gives you a level of confidence to begin with. Then the rest of it is just kind of being able to form those thoughts. And I go back again, like I said, to doing radio and being in spaces where I had to fill time and I had to figure out what to say. And so I think that kind of gave me the confidence to know that, hey, look, I know I can sit here and talk to you for a minute or so. You shouldn't draft, a wide receiver in the first round or what have you. I mean, I think all that practice kind of came into play when I finally got my opportunity.
preparation feed is kind of is one of the harder things out there, and I think it does come with just like it's practicing, it's being prepared for one, doing it, but also like having the research done. And, because there are some people that can definitely get by on just their personality and like, bullshitting their way through things, but it does certainly helps to know football and what's going on. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And, I think especially when it comes to football, fantasy football, I think sports of any kind, really, like sports fans have their own language, and, there are certain things they will say or certain ways they will say things. And you can tell pretty quickly talking to somebody whether they're actually a fan of that sport. And so I think, being able to speak that language way toward giving you some sort of credibility.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong on this. I feel like because fans are so well informed now, because there are so many sites churning out content. You can be on Twitter and literally talk to, any of us or any other analyst out there and get information that way, or just learn from following along with people, because there's just so much good information out there. Fans are smarter now. So I feel like if you don't know your shit, or if you are an outsider to kind of trying to play the part, I feel like it's harder now than ever to get away with that.
Oh, it absolutely is. No, it absolutely is. I mean, because like you said, because of the internet especially, fans have a voice, and you're right, they can talk to each other. And I think it's been good, because I think, like I said, it's given everybody a voice. I think at some point it's also kind of broken down the people who get to create content versus the people who consume it, because now I think everybody gets to play both sides, and I think it's made for a more interesting conversation.
Yeah. When you say interesting, do you mean in a positive or a negative way?
Both. I mean, I do think it's both. I think it's helped obviously educate a lot of people. I think it's forced us to talk about issues both in sport and I think culturally and socially, and I think a lot of that's all intertwined. I think it's forced us to have those kind of conversations, which sometimes are productive, sometimes aren't. I mean, and then as with anything, you have your asshole quotient. They're just going to go out there and they're going to be trolls and they're going to be destructive. But I think when it's all come down to it, I think there are more positives than negatives.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. Marcus, more about you, I guess, and because I think this is something I've been thinking about, because we do, because we work together, we're on the same team, and a lot of our destinies are inherently intertwined that way. But I guess we've kind of talked about your past, but it's one thing I've been asking the guests recently, like, what do you see as like your future? What's your end game in this industry? And maybe as our team's end game at large or whatever. But what is that for you?
I just want to do fun things. And I know that sounds generic, and I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I think one of the things that I've really loved about where we work is that there really is an opportunity for us to be creative and to do things we enjoy. I mean, just beyond even the fantasy football space, because, that's what got me there, and fantasy pays my bills, and it's been an amazing ride. I never certainly would have expected this. But I think at some point I would like to branch out from just beyond that. I would love to write a TV show. I would love to write the next Breaking Bad or something like that. I think in the shorter term, I just want us to be more creative. I mean, I want us to figure out ways to get our information out there, but to do it in a way that we all think is fun. Like, I would love for us to somehow do, maybe not even a podcast, but maybe like a YouTube series or something like that, where it's just us sitting in the stronghold like we would on a Tuesday and just talking about whatever we talk about. I mean, I think there are ways to do what we do even better. And I think that we're in a spot right now where they're allowing us a little more freedom to do that. And I would certainly love to take advantage of it, especially working with people that I enjoy working with.
Yeah, I think that's the coolest thing that I've discovered about working there, and comparing it to just what I hear from other people about different places. And I was just at I stayed at Matt Waldman's last night on my cross country journey, and I was telling him this, that like my favorite part about working at NFL media, and especially with NFL fantasy, like I feel like for the most part, none of us really take ourselves that seriously. And I think that's kind of displayed in our work. And I think that's a good thing.
Oh, I think it's a great thing. No, I think it's absolutely a great thing. And I think I think part of it comes with having to deal with the public in the sense that, look, we all want to win. We all want to be successful. We all want to be right when we're making our prediction. But I think seeing how difficult that is, I mean, we'll sit and we'll study everything, and then we'll still go out and whiff on a couple of picks on Sunday. I think that's allowed us to realize that this isn't serious. I mean, it's supposed to be a game. It's supposed to be fun. And I think, I also think it makes it a lot easier to go out and make some bold predictions when you realize that most of what you say is probably, not going to be 100% accurate anyway.
Yeah, that's for sure. We all have I mean, if you even look at like the Fantasy Pros rankings or whatever, like the most accurate that anybody is like, 60% or something. Like 70% is like outrageously accurate. So that's still like 30 to 40% of information that you're getting wrong, even if you're one of the best. So it is a hard, I think we've said that a lot on this podcast, that it's a very hard industry to take yourself too seriously. But one other thing I thought that was interesting that you mentioned there, and I know that like you and Alex especially are you're interested in a lot of other things outside of just football, and so am I. But like you guys are much more like pop culture fiends, and I know James talks about that all the time on the podcast. So if you could be doing something, and this is something I really wish I had asked the guests on like every podcast, but if there was one other thing that you could be doing for a career other than fantasy football, like if tomorrow fantasy football ended or the NFL went under, because we know they're short on money, or at least our parking lot looks that way. But if for some reason the NFL went under tomorrow, what would be your like other dream job, I guess?
Okay, dream job. Yeah, that's something, because otherwise I'd probably go back to cutting fish like I did in college, working at a seafood counter.
So I don't even want to we don't need to get onto like that dangerous road of like what disastrous job would you have to take?
I honestly, I would love, I still always wanted to be a writer. I mean, and I always thought, either I'd write a novel, or my best friend and I thought, at 11 years old, we were going to write an Oscar-winning film. I think we wrote about 40 pages, and who knows where they are. But I still want to write. I still want to do something creative. I mean, I would love to be a showrunner. I guess that's the popular Hollywood term for them now. But, I sit and look, I live in Los Angeles, where every third person either wants to act, write, or direct. I want to write. So, I mean, that's what I do. I spend one of my hobbies is just screenwriting, and just, hey, maybe one day I'm lucky enough to, stand on stage and have something be successful. But that would be the dream job. If the NFL didn't happen, I think I'd just, I'd be a waiter out pitching scripts to every Hollywood so-and-so that came by.
I could see you. I could see you doing that. I certainly could not see myself doing that, but that's a whole other topic for another day. But now that's pretty cool. So, Marcus, I mentioned like a little while back. And just we'll just have a few more questions here, so you can go watch the Warriors. Apparently, I was listening to.
Before they start, it's all good.
Yeah, I was listening to the podcast, our Fantasy Live podcast, when you guys had Liz Lowe's on. Super jealous, by the way, that I wasn't there for that and the room story. Which, holy shit! If you haven't listened to that episode of the Fantasy Live podcast, pause this podcast. Please come back, but pause this podcast and go listen to that, because it is outrageous.
It's phenomenal.
Oh my god, I couldn't believe that. That was insane. But I think it was, James was saying that it's like a guarantee, basically, that the Warriors are going to win or whatever. So maybe I don't have you since you already know you're going to win, maybe you can just stay here another 2 hours. But seriously, just a few more questions here. But I mentioned like, that we all have, you, me, franchise, Alex, we all have different strengths, in my opinion. And I think I know I could take a guess at what everybody's is, but what would you say that yours is that kind of sets you apart from us and then from the industry at large? Like, what makes TV's Marcas Grant?
Wow. Oh, that's a deep question.
It's a big question.
It is a big question. I mean, I do like to think, I do like to think that humor has something to do with it. But I tend to, I guess, make myself sort of a jack of all trades. I mean, I think I've always tried to be as well-rounded as possible. So, I know I know that I'm not the strongest when it comes to analytics, but I do want to know that. I feel like that's important. I don't think I'm the funniest. I mean, I think Adam Rank does a phenomenal job. Obviously, he's a stand-up comedian on the side. I think he's very funny. I think Franchise and Gelhar both have an incredible focus, with their writing. I think, you're the wide receiver whisperer. So I've always tried to crib a little bit from everybody that I think is successful. I try to see what people are good at and at least try to take a part of it. So even if I'm not great at any one thing, I try to be really good at everything. And so, I don't know. I think that's part of it. I think, and this is, I don't know, this might not be the most popular thing ever, but really means kind of something to me to be Black but not an athlete, and to be doing this on a professional level, because I think, most times you don't see a lot of Black guys doing this, and when they are, they generally are athletes. And so I don't know, that I feel like that's a little bit of something different. I'm starting to see there are more folks out there, more guys out there like me who are doing this, and I'm really excited about that. But yeah, that part actually, that's something I do take a little bit of pride in.
No, that's really cool, and I would love for you to expand more on that point, because I was actually sitting here in my car today as I was driving, like thinking about, like, and I've mentioned that I'm going to do a second season of this podcast. I was thinking about doing like round table type of things, and I was actually thinking about, like, like race in the industry or whatever. So what do you like? I guess I kind of just want you to expand a little bit on that. Like, what does that mean to you? What do you think like that gives you, that sets you apart, or how is it maybe a disadvantage sometime, this, that, or the other?
Yeah, I think it's different. I mean, and I think it's something that it's certainly changing, which is good. And not just in fantasy, but I'm just thinking across even like the broadcast industry, is that generally, most of the Black folks you see on TV, I mean, at least the men, even in the women too, are former athletes. And so there are a handful of guys who came up, kind of through journalism schools. I mean, I can think of Dave Sims, who was the radio voice of the Mariners for a long time. Gus Johnson certainly didn't play professionally or anything. Brown, who was on CBS and Fox for a long time. I mean, he was a college basketball player, if I believe correctly. So, I mean, I think, I don't know if I've ever had a disadvantage. At least I don't want to believe that. I think maybe I'm being naive in that respect. I think, because I've been able to, I feel like I've done pretty well, all things considered. And so I'd like to believe that I've been hopefully judged mostly on the merit of my work. But, I guess I'd be naive to think that somewhere along the way, somebody didn't just say, I wasn't a right fit for them. But I do get excited that there are more opportunities there. I think one of the things I've always said, that if I somehow came into a bunch of money, I would like to go back to my hometown, which is, between Black and Filipino and Latino, is pretty heavy there, and create kind of a media content program in high schools to kind of open up those opportunities, or at least get people to think that it can be something that they can do.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, guys, from your perspective, did you ever, I mean, you kind of answered the question, but like, I guess I would imagine that it just does seem like kind of an athlete thing, because it's a perspective that I can't speak to at all, because I was at Matt Walden's last night. We had a really good discussion on like race and identity, and, being being a white man, I guess I never feel that's is a thing that people don't realize about whiteness. And this is way off track of what I normally talk about in this podcast, but I don't give a shit, because it's my podcast. I can say whatever I want. Like, as a white person, I think the thing that we as white people never realize is that we are white, and because we're never faced with that on like a daily basis, right? Because it just, there are no disadvantages or whatever. And I think that's a really interesting kind of perspective that I think a lot of white people don't consider, and especially in this business.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, I try not to think about it. I mean, it's hard. If you spent your whole day thinking about it, you wouldn't get anything done. So you don't. Mm-hmm. But, it's easy to notice. Like when I went to the minor league baseball job fairs, and I'm applying for play-by-play jobs, I mean, it's easy to notice that I'm the only Black guy there. And, not that anybody was rude to me or I had any problems, but noticed of, but you just kind of learn to deal with it and move on. Like I said, I think because the industry is so competitive, I think it's easy to believe that you didn't get a job because there was just somebody better, because you send out resumes, you send out tapes, and they kind of go out in a void and you never hear back, so you never really know the reason that you got rejected. So I guess that makes it easy to think there are other reasons that it happened. I don't know, but I think part of the democratization of the media through the internet has allowed for more voices and more things like that. I mean, I think the joke about Black Twitter, I do think it's a voice, though, and I think it's something that is starting to get bigger. And I think you're starting to see it in all sorts of different demographics, whether it's racial, whether it's sexual orientation, what have you. I think it's allowed for more people to kind of get their perspective out there, where in the past it just wouldn't have been an opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely think that's fantastic. And there's, I mentioned NPR politics or NPR podcasts earlier. There's a great podcast that they just started called Code Switch, and the first episode was actually all about like whiteness and identity and stuff like that. And I thought it was a really interesting discussion. It's another thing I'd recommend. If you can't tell, again, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts lately, but I think that is a really important point, and that the industry is changing, but there's still a lot of ways that we have, long ways that we have to go in, like the minute kind of smaller interactions, even when we don't think they're there. Just being aware that they might be there is an important thing, in my opinion. Like, there's no, I don't know. I know we get a lot of this, like I know we talk about this privately, like, PC bros on Twitter or anything like that. Just being aware of things is never a bad thing, honestly.
I don't know. I just think, respecting people is always a good thing to do.
Right. I know I retweeted something the other day of Carl Safchek, who works at DL, or used to work at DLF, and now he hosts a Dynasty One podcast. He said something about, like, can we stop using the term trade rape as a thing like that, it's like basically saying like that a perceived unfair trade is not the same as like a sexual assault, and we shouldn't equate it that way. And I retweeted it, and then of course somebody hopped in like adding both of us, like, oh, so we have to be PC among our friends now, #white knight. And I didn't want to respond because I'm on vacation I was at my dad's house. I mean about that life right now, but I did want, my thought is like, geez, I know it's so hard to be like, sensitive to people and like be, and it's such a burden to just do the right, like seemingly to do the right thing. It's exhausting. I'm sorry. But yeah, anyways, but kind of veering away from that whole sadness part of the world, Marcus. And actually,
the Feelings podcast. We finally got on the Feelings podcast.
We really did it. I knew that we could get on this wave together, Marcus. So I'm very happy you could be here for episode 28, the Jonathan Stewart episode of the podcast. But no, seriously, kind of a different topic, but still a little bit of a sad one in a way. Marcus, I've been asking a lot of people on the podcast lately, like, what's something that you see in the industry that you don't really like or maybe wish was different?
I do fear that we are going to stop talking to more of the casual user. I mean, I think, with next gen stats and analytics, obviously it's giving us a deeper understanding of the game, and certainly made the prognosticating, I won't say easier, but kind of, I think, made it more of an educated guess. It was always kind of a guess. Now it's more of an educated guess. And I think, I think there's a lot of things going there, but I also think there's a danger in going too far, to the point that the casual user who, maybe is just playing because it's something social to do in their office or what have you, that maybe they aren't necessarily in tune with that. And they just want to know, they just want it as simple as Bill Williams or Jonathan Stewart start, yes or no. And I think, I don't think we've gone that far yet. But I do see, with such a trend toward that maybe we start to alienate people who aren't their time looking at this sort of stuff.
Well, you're basically subtweeting me right now on my own podcast. No, but that's a really good point. And it's an answer that I don't think anybody's even come close to relating to this point in the show. but it's true. And I've even, as somebody, I'm being facetious here a little bit, but as somebody that does run, some complicated content, the one onus that I find myself, especially lately, that I've been thinking about, like, how can I make my work at NFL more accessible to the casual fan, or even reception perception? How do I make that more accessible to the casual fan? It is an important thing, because if you want your content to reach the masses, you can always sit there and accept the fact that, oh, well, this is too complicated, casual, get accessible to everybody.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges I think we really face at the NFL, because we are the NFL. We do get such a wide range of users. I mean, we get the people who are playing fantasy for the first time versus the people who've been playing it for years and want to go really deep in stats. I mean, I think, there are, this. I mean, there are plenty of people out there doing really, really good work. And I think, some of the smaller sites, I think they have the freedom to go and I think be as complex and as in-depth as they want, because if you are going to, Number Fire or Football Guys or somebody like that, you really are serious about your fantasy football. And so I think you're looking for a deeper level of understanding there. But I think, when you talk about some of the bigger ones, like us and ESPN and Yahoo and stuff, I think it's easy to forget and important to remember that we are talking to a much wider range of user and a fantasy football fan.
Yeah, I mean, you're throwing a net out there and you're catching a lot of different fish when like 50,000 people are reading your article on a in season on an average basis. I mean, it's tough to know what you're marketing to, and I think that there's an art to it, and that's something that if like you're an aspiring writer or analyst or radio personality, whatever, like that's something that you've got to be aware of. So I really think that's a good point for you to bring up, for sure. Well, Marcus, I really appreciate the time that you've given me here tonight. And right before the Warriors go on, hear me broadcasting from the La Quinta in Shreveport, Louisiana. This is a hell of a show we've cobbled together here, my friend. But I guess one last thing I always do for everybody on the podcast is I give the guests a chance to have the floor to say whatever the hell you want before I yank it out from under you. So Marcus, my friend, the floor is yours.
Wow. I have to say that I feel like incredibly blessed. I know that, I think on the day-to-day, and I think everybody does this, you on the day-to-day, you see all the things that are kind of bad or the things that frustrate you. And sometimes you are staring at the trees and not seeing the whole forest. And I think as I sit here in my apartment, talking to you about this and kind of recounting where I've come from and where I am now, it just reminds you that, like, journey, everything can be what you make it. And I don't know, I just feel fortunate to be here right now. So thank you for letting me share. Thank you for letting me come on and kind of, talk about myself, which is something I don't do a ton of, but it's been fun. I've appreciated this.
No, man. Well, of course. And I think that it's a really cool experience to get to share with people, because, we talk about so much sometimes. We talk about 1,000 different players, and especially if you do the NFL draft work, 90% of them are never going to matter. And,
right.
You talk about so that sometimes it is nice to look back and reflect. And I think that one thing I always encourage myself and other people that are in our position to always, like, never lose sight of the fact that this is like the coolest thing in the world, that we get to do this. And that you've come from, like you mentioned, slinging fish or cutting fish or whatever, like that could be our lives, man. Like there's,
right.
It's a certain set of circumstances and a little bit of hard work along the way. And it's important I think it's important to look back, and it's important for people to see that too, that, you've accomplished a hell of a lot in your career. I'm hoping to accomplish more in my career, but never losing sight of the perspective of how we got here, I think is important.
Well, I mean,
just to put that out in the world.
Celebrate your 22nd birthday. You got plenty of time.
I am 24. God, I'm going to be 25 in August, man. I'm getting old. Some dead air at the old comment. Well,
no, you're not old. Come on, you're not as old as me. So,
well, we'll keep that one under wraps. So nobody. I will say, I'm not gonna out how old you are, but and I'm not saying that you are old, but it is funny, like, because you are super funny and you're very relatable to a large different group of people. I will say this on the podcast, like when I actually found out that you were that you were much older than me, I was like, holy shit, Marcus, like what? He's like actually cool though.
Thanks.
Say, well, now that I've kind of half insulted you, I think that this is a good stopping point for the show. But anyway, I'm just kidding. Marcus is fantastic, and one of my favorite people that I work with. I get to work with a lot of cool people, as we both said, and I think that is weird. Like Marcus said, I'll echo that. Very #blessed. But anyways, Marcus, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your perspective. We really appreciate that. And as for the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in as always. And it's so interested and so willing to tune in. I am it's awesome, and I really appreciate it. But so thank you guys so much for listening today, and I hope you learned something.